I'm going to explain to you the French Revolution right now. Okay, ready? Okay, so the French Revolution really starts kicking off in 1789, okay? And so it's important to think about like what's happening in 1789. So what's happening is financial crisis. Okay, so why is France in a financial crisis? Well, first of all, they just got off the back of the 7 Years' War with Britain, and that was super fucking expensive. Also, they were sugar daddying us for the American Revolution. So a lot of people don't know this, but the French financed like a huge portion of the American Revolution, and we never paid them back. So they're really reeling financially right now. In addition to that, they're focusing a lot on their global colonies. So like, think about like the French Caribbean or like French Polynesia, like colonies that are like all around the world that they need to try and like keep oppressed and like keep in check. So they're spending a ton of money on their military to try and keep these colonies that they have basically after the war. So as a result, they're in a ton of debt. Okay. Like a crazy amount of debt. All right. As this is happening, the French aristocracy is like living it up, right? And having these crazy parties, doing all this crazy stuff. And the working people are really suffering. What do I mean by that? Well, as a response to the crazy amount of debt that they're in, King Louis XVI teamed up with these other guys who thought they were super smart and decided as a solution, they're going to deregulate grain production so that people have to pay more for bread. Okay, this is really important because in the 17th century, if you're a peasant, like all you're eating is fucking bread, okay? There's like no meat, no vegetables, like no cheese, like barely, like you're literally eating bread day in and day out. Like that's like the only fucking thing you're eating. So for the price of bread to go up so drastically when like the average person isn't making more money is like a pretty big deal, and people are like fucking starving in the streets, basically. So the average working person no longer can afford their bread. And that means that there's starvation, famine, which means riots, right? Okay, so let's put pause on the riots for a second and talk about the class systems, the three estates, okay? So first we have the clergy, and that's the Roman Catholic Church. So we have the priests, the bishops, etc. These guys own 40% of the wealth, and they make up 0.5% of the population, okay? Up next, we have the nobility. Okay, so that's the aristocracy, the daddy's money, the like royalty. So we have like the lords, the ladies, the counts, countesses, so on and so forth. Okay, these guys make up 1.5% of the population, and they own 20% of the wealth. And then third, we have the commoners. But then in this time period, we're in the pre-industrial revolution. And so the commoners are supposed to encompass the peasants and wealthier merchants. But during this time, like there's a rising middle class. So I'm splitting it up into two. So I'm going to say we have the commoners, which is the third estate, which is the bourgeoisie, the wealthy merchants. Okay, so this is like the wealthy business owners, not like your average working class person. And so these guys make up 13% of the population, and they own 25% of the wealth. Okay, and so now lumped in with the commoners, but not really, because it's like a vastly different way of life, we have the peasants, okay? These guys own 5% of the wealth, and they make up 85% of the population, okay? So I'm sure you guys can already see where this is going, but let's break down the tax obligation for these three groups of people. So remember, the bourgeoisie and the peasants are supposed to be kind of lumped into the same group, but it's vastly different. So I'm splitting them up in this, but if you read about it, you might hear that the bourgeoisie, the commoners, whatever, are like in the same group. But for the interest of making this simple, I'm splitting them up. So the clergy, right? They pay no taxes. They pay $0 in taxes. The nobility, all right, they're paying almost no taxes. I think some sources will say that they paid no taxes. Some sources will say they had a 5% income tax, which is still no taxes. So these guys are paying no taxes. Now we have the bourgeoisie, the wealthy merchants, okay? And they are paying a land tax, an income tax, a poll tax, which is a tax that you have to pay if you want to vote, and then a salt tax, which I'm assuming is just like for spices because spices weren't super common yet. So then the peasants, okay, which are lumped in with this group of the bourgeoisie, with the commoners, are paying all of these taxes, right? All of the taxes that the bourgeoisie are paying, but they're also paying, they have like to pay to use like the ovens in the town, the flour mills in the town. If they're using someone's land, like if they're farming on someone else's land, they have to pay for that. They have to give a share of their harvest to the church, and they have to also pay the church as well. They also have to do unpaid labor for infrastructure projects, so like building roads, etc. So the peasants are really getting dicked right now, right? Because like we said up here, they make up 85% of the population, but they only own 5% of the wealth, compared to even the bourgeoisie, like the wealthy merchant class. They make up 13% of the population and they own 25% of the wealth. And while this group, technically, they both have the same tax obligations, there's all this other shit that the peasants have to deal with that the bourgeoisie does not have to deal with. Okay, so this is causing a lot of resentment. Okay, this video is already 7 minutes long, so I'm gonna call it quits for now. If you guys want, I'll make another video going into the storming of the Bastille and like the riots and the guillotine shit up next, okay? Part 2 of explaining the French Revolution. Now we're going to talk about the political uprisings that started. Okay, so last time we chatted, I was explaining the French class system, okay? And what we were talking about is basically there's three and a half main classes. So we have the clergy, which pays no taxes, owns 40% of the wealth, and makes up 0.5% of the population. Next, we have the nobility, who pays like basically no taxes, owns 20% of the wealth, and makes up 1.5% of the population. We have the commoners, which technically includes the peasants, but not really. So we have the commoners, which is the bourgeoisie, which is the wealthy merchants, which own 25% of the wealth, 13% of the population, and pay a fucking ton of taxes. And then we have the peasants, right, who own 5% of the wealth, make up 85% of the population, and pay the same taxes that the wealthy merchants pay, the same like fucking crazy amount of taxes. And they have a whole other obligations, like they have to perform unpaid labor for public service, they have to pay the church, they have to give a share of their harvest, they have to pay to use ovens, mills, lands, etc. Okay? So vibes are terrible right now because it's 1789 and France is in a crazy financial crisis. They're in a ton of debt, which we also talked about last video. So the government's in a ton of debt, people are starving, and there's bread riots. So as a result of the bread riots and everything that's going on, King Louis XVI attempts financial reform, okay? But here's the thing, he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. So he consults with his financial ministers, and they have three kind of main ideas. So first, make the first and second estates start paying taxes. So the nobility and the church, all right? Because right now they're paying no taxes. Secondly, end feudal privileges. So those are the privileges that the nobility mostly and like some of the clergy get. And then 3, cut government spending. Because remember, this is in the time of the lavish parties at Versailles and like gross government overspending on personal stuff for the king, the queen, and the nobility. So these are the 3 main suggestions. So here's the thing, right? This in 1789 is not the first time that people are suggesting that Louis XVI do this, okay? People have been saying this for years because it's not like this just all starts happening like out of the blue. There has been financial disaster in France for like a good decade now. And so people have been saying that he needs to do this shit for years, okay? But the problem is Louis XVI keeps firing his financial cabinet, okay? There's a huge turnover rate because he's firing everybody. Sounds like somebody else that we know. But anyways, he fires his financial cabinet. It doesn't really work out. Things are really bad. So what Louis decides to do next is call the Estates Generale for the first time since 1614. So what the fuck is the Estates Generale? Basically, remember when we talked about the 3 class systems right here? So the clergy, the nobility, and the wealthy merchants, right? These guys make up the Estates Generale, okay? And the Estates Generale, their job is to petition the king for whatever it is that the public wants at the time, whether that be taxes, public health reform, whatever it is. Their job is to go ask the king to do shit for them, okay? But the last time that the Estates Generale was brought together was in 1614, okay? Over 150 years ago. So we are long overdue, okay, for the estate to get called. But here's the deal. Remember when we talked about how these guys make up 0.5% of the population, these guys make 1.5%, and then these guys, not including the peasants, make up 13%? So everybody gets the same number of votes, regardless of the population density of their group. So the first estate, let's say the first estate gets 50 votes, the second estate gets 50 votes, and the third estate gets 50 votes. Okay, it's not like a population-based thing. And the first and second estate obviously are going to support the monarchy because that's how they get all their perks and privileges, like not paying taxes. Okay, the third estate resents their exclusion from political power because it's going to be super easy for these 2 guys to team up and outvote the third estate every time. So it's going to be impossible for the third estate to get any significant reform passed via a vote because these 2 guys, the first and second estate, the clergy and the nobility, are always going to team up to support the monarchy and push these guys out of the political system. And then here I've added an important note because the third estate is supposed to include peasants and wealthy merchants, but peasants could not convene in the Estates Generale or vote. So there's also this divide between the wealthy merchants and the peasant class. And like we said over here, the peasant class makes up 85% of the population, okay? And they pay the most taxes. So despite making up 85% of the population and paying the most taxes, they are not going to be represented in the Estates Generale at all. The wealthy merchant class is supposed to represent them, but they really don't do that. So now it's time to go through a little timeline. So May 5th, King Louis XVI calls to order the Estates Generale for the first time since 1614, okay? June 17th, so this goes on for a long time. It's not just like a one-day thing. So they're like in session for a good month. June 17th, the third estate is sick of the gridlock, right? Because like we mentioned before, the first and second estate is just constantly outvoting the third estate on matters to do with reform. So the third estate is sick and tired of the gridlock, and they form something called the National Assembly in response to deadlock, okay? Now, June 20th, King Louis XVI locks out the third estate from the meeting hall. Like, he literally shuts the doors on the third estate and says, "You're not welcome here anymore. I'm sick and tired of your bullshit. Get out and stay out." Spoiler alert, that was not a great move. All right, so then June 27th, a week later, King Louis XVI does an about face and decides he's going to recognize the General Assembly because I think he realizes that not representing like 98% of the population is pretty fucked up. So July 11th, he does another about face. King Louis XVI does another about face. So he's like flip-flopped 7 times at this point. But he fires his financial minister again for like the 7th time. Once again, it reminds me of someone else that we know. And so then July 14th, 3 or 4 days later, storming of the Bastille happens. The revolution has begun. So this stuff is all happening during 1789, okay? So from May to July. So what happens next? August 1789, okay, the National Assembly publishes the Declaration of Rights for the Man and the Citizen. So what this document does was it declared that church property is now public property. That's important because in this time period, a lot of the wealth that's mentioned when they say they have 40% of the wealth, they have 30% of the wealth is property, okay? And they wrote the Declaration of Rights, which basically was just like, hey, like everybody should be able to vote. But still not everybody could vote. That's a whole different thing. But that happens in August 1789. But here's the deal. These things pretty much only benefited the wealthy merchant class, okay? Because even if something's public property, you still have to buy it, okay? So the wealthy merchant class can afford to buy it. The peasant class, which makes up 85% of the population, is not going to be able to do that. Also, the Declaration of Rights, like the right to vote, you still have to pay a tax to vote, okay? So the 85% of the population that's a peasant cannot afford to pay the tax to vote. So these two things, while they're good steps in the right direction, they are only impacting the wealthy merchant class. So shit doesn't really get better. Okay, now that we've gotten the build-up out of the way, next video, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite part of the French Revolution, which is the guillotines. So buckle up for part 3. Okay, part 3, French Revolution. Thank you for bearing with me. Now it is finally time to get to everybody's favorite part. Off with their heads. Let's get into it. But first, a brief disclaimer. This video is intended for educational purposes only. It does not constitute a call to action, endorsement, or advocacy for any political or social movement. The content aims to provide historical context and analysis based on available information. Your discretion is advised. So last we talked, it's July 14th, 1789, and a mob of angry people just stormed the Bastille, killed a bunch of people, and the revolution has begun. Okay, so now we are entering our fear era. It's the Great Fear, okay, from July through August 1789. So we're seeing widespread panic and revolts from the working class, division between peasants and wealthy merchants. Remember how last time I was saying, you know, we kind of lumped this group in together, but really there's a lot of division because their lifestyles are vastly different. So we're starting to kind of see the divide form between the peasant class and the wealthy merchant class, and peasant uprising. So October 1784, we get the Women's March on Versailles. So what's going on is the reforms that have been put in place thus far are really only helping like the wealthy business owners, the merchant class, right? Bread prices are still super, super high. And that's going to be a big problem if you're a peasant and your diet is 99% bread. Okay, if a loaf of bread costs a month's wages, then that's going to be pretty tough to deal with. So obviously women are usually like the caretakers of the family, you know? So they're the ones who are most immediately feeling this squeeze when the bread prices continue to rise, because they're usually the ones who are going out and buying the bread and all of this different stuff. So the women gather, form a mob, march down to Versailles, and basically just really fuck shit up down there. Here's a couple of pictures. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. So basically they go down there, they go to Versailles, and they demand a change in leadership, and they bring Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI back to Paris. Because remember, they live at Versailles now. And so these ladies are like, fuck you, you're not going to go live in Versailles and just like make all these policies that make our life horrible. You're coming back to Paris so we can keep an eye on you. They also killed a lot of people. They killed a lot of guards and put makeup on their faces and put their heads on spikes and like marched them next to the carriages that Louis and Marie were riding in on the way back to Paris. So after the Women's March on Versailles, of course, leave it to women to do fucking everything. Things are kind of chill for a little bit. Things are chill for like a year and a half, where Louis and Marie Antoinette are in Paris. They're trying to like kind of rule from there, but they're like having to give power to this new group of revolutionaries, and they're just kind of trying to figure everything out. So then a year or so later, 1791, the constitutional monarchy becomes the way of the Parisian government, or the French government. So what a constitutional monarchy is when royal family are figureheads, but the real power lies with parliament. So think about like the British monarchy, how like we still have the royal family in Britain, like they still have that, but they really have no real power. But terrible news, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette attempt to flee Paris in like a really desperate attempt to try and seize power back. So they go to Austria, which, remember, Austria is where Marie Antoinette is from. So her family is the royal family in Austria. Like her brother is the ruler in Austria right now. So they go attempt to flee to Austria to get military support so that they can go take back France. So Marie basically hits up her brother and she's like, bro, I really need to use your army. Like, they want to kill me. Like, this sucks. Like, I can't spend any money anymore. Like, this is super shitty. Please help. And so they try and go do that, but they get arrested and brought back to Paris. And this is a public relation. Okay, we're so back. So as all of this stuff is going on, the guillotine gets invented. So that's just a little foreshadowing for later. So that was 1791. Now let's get into 1792. A lot happened in 1792, so just like buckle up. So in 1791, remember, Louis and Marie attempt to flee to Austria. So in 1792, the National Assembly declares war on Austria, Marie's home country. Marie is living in Paris still with Louis. They've just been taken back and captured on the border of France and Austria. And she, Marie, a little sneaky girl, is writing letters to her family, who is also the Austrian royal family, giving away France's military strategy. Okay, this is no good. So what happens next? Prussia, which I think is the Russian Empire, but hey guys, it's me. So the Prussia was not Russia, okay? I was being stupid, as thousands of people pointed out in the comments. Prussia, okay, is Germany and Poland today. So just like a quick clarification on that. It used to be called Prussia, joins Austria, and the ruler of Prussia at the time publishes a manifesto in the French newspapers threatening the destruction of Paris if any harm comes to Marie or Louis XVI. Well, spoiler alert, harm does end up coming to them. So this was supposed to be like a show of force against the French revolutionaries, but the French revolutionaries did not take it that way. They actually got super pissed, and thousands of monarchy loyalists get arrested in Paris. So now anybody that supports Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, or the monarchy in general is arrested, thrown in jail, and a huge number of able-bodied men leave Paris to join the war effort. So this is very significant because all of the really like strong man soldiers that were kind of like making the regular people in Paris feel safe with all of these political prisoners have now left to go join the war. So everyone's kind of freaking out. Like, Paris is mostly like women, children, and men who didn't go off to go fight. So they're all kind of freaking out because they're like, we just arrested all these people. Okay, what if they like break out? What are we going to do? So they decide we should kill them. So everyone left in Paris, once again, mostly women and men who didn't leave to go fight in the war, storms the prison and kills all of the prisoners, 1,600 people in total, slaughtered, dead, gone. And it like they would kind of just massacre them, but also they would give them like little mock trials. Like they would just be like, you know, really quick, like 30-second trials and then kill them to make it seem fair. But it really is just like a massacre, okay? Here's some pictures. As you can see, it's just kind of like chaotic. What happens next? Louis XVI stands trial for treason. Spoiler alert, he loses. He does not win that one. Okay, so now we are in 1793 through like 1794, and we are in our terror era. Okay, this is the reign of terror. This is when everybody gets got. This is when a lot of shit goes down, okay? So January in 1793, Louis is gone, all right? He gets got, he's done, okay? Next, Marie Antoinette gets arrested and stands trial for high treason, like her husband, but also depleting the national treasury because of the parties, and incest with her son. So let's talk about that last one really quick. Marie Antoinette did not commit incest with her son. This was a lie that was brought against her because the French people really fucking hated her, okay? Like, she stood for everything they hated. She stood for the entire reason they were rebelling in the first place. Like, she's known for throwing these lavish parties, let them eat cake, all of this shit, which she never said let them eat cake. But anyways, she's known for all this stuff, so they are making up just, like, slanderous lies against her in order to publicly shame her, basically. So, Marie Antoinette executed, gone. But guess what? There's still a war going on. Yeah, remember over here when we're talking about the war in Austria? That's still fully happening right now. And France is getting their ass kicked by the rest of Europe. They're getting so fucked on. Britain is coming in. Austria's coming in, Russia's coming in, because all these other countries know that France is in a state of turmoil. They're all just like coming. It's like a smash and grab to see who can get the most land and resources from this country that's going through a political uprising. Now the terror begins. Martial law is implemented in France, and the new government suspends the constitution and all the rights it was supposed to guarantee. So now there's a new tyrannical government in place right after they overthrew the old one, and that's where we're going to leave out for now. I will get back to you tomorrow with the rest of the story. Thank you very much. Love you. Bye. Oh my gosh, you guys. Let's just dive right in, shall we? No time for pleasantries. Okay, so last we chatted, Marie Antoinette is executed. She's gone. Okay, so is Louis, and there is a new sheriff in town. Remember, the monarchy is overthrown. The monarchy is gone, okay? So now what we have is the National Assembly, which these guys created. There was other guys who were a part of it too, but these are like the main players, and it doesn't really matter either way. I'll probably talk about like maybe two of these people. But the monarchy is gone. We have the National Assembly now, which ends up being called the Convention. So when you hear me talk about the Convention, I'm just talking about their legislative body, like their parliament, their Congress. That's what that is. So this guy, Maximilien Robespierre. This guy's nuts. We'll get into him in a second. Next, George Danton. Next, Jacques-Pierre Brissot. Next, Jean-Paul Marat. This guy, I don't think we really even talk about him. We talk about this guy. This guy, all you need to know is he was a journalist who was very prominent during the French Revolution, and he was executed pretty early on into the game. So this guy's dead, but he'll come up still. Okay, so now it's September 1793, and we are in our terror era. Okay, remember last episode? We were in the Great Fear. Okay, now we're in the terror. So there's still a war going on, remember, because France is at war with Austria and Prussia, which I've recently learned is what Germany and like Poland and that kind of area of Europe is now. They're at war with France because remember, Marie Antoinette was from Austria. She asked her brother if they could help her and her husband, King Louis XVI, take back France from the revolutionaries. Didn't work out. Marie and Louis are executed, and France is now currently at war with Austria and their allies. France, okay, getting their ass kicked. They're getting their ass handed to them. We also talked about that last episode, so I'm going to move on. So if you've been following along with me, you probably thought that we've already gotten past all of the crazy shit, but buckle up, Buttercup. Like, we are not even fucking close to being done here. Like, if you think we're in calm times now, you are in for a big awakening. So, France is getting fucked on by the rest of Europe, and so all of the revolutionaries in the new government are pretty scared because they're like, if the Prussian and Austrian government take France, like invade France and take the country, then there's going to be so much bloodshed. It's going to be really, really bad. A lot of people are going to die. So what did they decide to do as a result? More bloodshed. More bloodshed. We love more bloodshed. So the new government implements martial law and suspends the new constitution and all of the rights it was supposed to guarantee. So remember, like, everything they've been fighting for like the rights of man and of the citizen, that whole runaround, they decided enough with that for now. We're going to put that on pause and we're going to do tyranny again because shit's looking pretty bad. So they all convene in an assembly and declare that terror is the order of the day. They actually said that. That's a direct quote. Terror is the order of the day, order up. And the people who are doing this are the guys that I was showing you at the beginning. So, except for that one guy who's dead. And they all kind of play a different role in this whole situation, but just picture guys like that when you're wondering, like, who's making these decisions. It's guys who look like that. So, the law of suspects is implemented when martial law is started in France. So the law of suspects basically is just like, if you fucking breathe wrong, then you're anti-revolution and you're getting executed. They put in place a bunch of like crazy rules, like you have to address each other as citizen instead of like madame and monsieur, like just crazy stuff like that. And it's a very, very strict environment and it's not looking good. So anyone suspected of anti-revolution activity is rounded up, arrested, tried, and executed very quickly. Like this is a lot of people, a large turnaround of people. And who's enforcing this law? We have police, spies, okay, so undercover cops basically, and then neighbors ratting on each other is basically the two main forms of enforcement. So like if we were at the bread line together, for example, and you overhear me bitching about the price of bread, saying the price of bread is still too high, you're going to turn me into those old white guys and they're going to cut my head off. That's basically the situation. So this is no good, right? Because now we have the regular everyday people of France turning against each other, and that's just not great for like the revolutionary spirit. And remember last video when I was talking about the divide between the wealthy middle class and the peasants? That's starting to really show now, because you have to remember the peasants are not the ones who can read and write, okay? Like if you are a working class French person in the 1700s, you don't know how to read and write, you're probably not super articulate, you're not going to be the person who has like the seat at the table, for lack of better words, to be making these revolutionary decisions. So while the revolution was a group effort, it's largely run by these rich white guys, okay? And now the rich white guys have formed basically just a new tyranny that's rounding up people and killing them, average French citizens. So that's sowing more dissent within all the other French citizens who are getting fucked on and their neighbors are getting killed. And so that causes more people to speak out against the new revolutionary government, and it causes more people to get killed. And that's why this is called the Terror, because a lot of people die. Like 12,000 people die during this period, get their heads cut off. So some other things that happened during this time, the Committee of Public Safety is formed. That's 12 rich guys who get to tell everyone else what to do. The Committee of Public Safety is kind of an ironic term because they killed a lot of the public. Also, press censorship is so back. We're so back with press censorship. So the main architect of the terror, the main guy we're going to be talking about is this guy, Maximilien Robespierre. So just remember that name. So now France is in the de-Christianization era, okay? They change all the street names that have religious overtones, churches are destroyed, they drop a new calendar where the months are renamed and the weeks are now 10 days long, so everyone forgets what day Sunday's supposed to be. And you understand why they had this mindset, right, of de-Christianization, because remember, all the way back in video 1, we talked about how the clergy held 40% of the wealth and they were 0.5% of the population. So the church was arguably a problem in this whole system. So they're in their de-Christianization era. They changed the calendar. The weeks are 10 days long now and like whatever. But it just gets really weird really, really fast. So put the church on hold for a second. Now we're in our more terror era. It's time for more terror. France is finally doing better at war, thanks to some random dude named Napoleon. We will get to him later. But Maximilian, Mr. Maxi Boy, is still super into terror. So he says, terror without virtue is disastrous, but virtue without terror is powerless. Like, okay, whatever that means. And people are cooling on the terror, okay? People are kind of like, this is enough terror. And Danton, one of Maximilian's old buddies, he's really cooling on the terror. He's had enough, and he's trying to organize a group of people to end the terror. So Robespierre is not fucking with this new mindset that Danton has. He's like, I want more terror. No, like, we're not stopping the terror. So Danton's executed. He's gone now. And when he's on the scaffolding of the guillotine, he says, "My only regret is going up before that rat Robespierre." So the girls are fighting. Now, okay, before we were in the Terror, now we're in the Great Terror. We're in our Great Terror era. 800 people are executed per month. This guy Robespierre is going fucking bonkers. These are just normal people. These aren't like nobility. These are just everyday citizens like you and me who are seen in some way or another to be like counter-revolutionary. Okay, now we get to my favorite part personally, which is the cult of the supreme being. This is nuts. So Robespierre replaces the Catholic God with the goddess of reason. That sounds cool, whatever. He has this whole little ceremony where he like comes down dressed as like the goddess of reason in a toga. It's really, really odd. People are like, this guy is nuts. This guy's nuts. So Robespierre and all of his friends get rounded up and arrested. Rather than face execution, they all attempt suicide. All of his friends are successful. He is not. He missed. He shot himself in the face. He didn't die. And so they, I guess, tied him to a table, according to some reports, and tormented him. Like, not tortured him, like bullied him for a couple hours, and then brought him up with the broken face to the guillotine. Now the Terror is over. Yay. We love the Terror being over. 5 years pass, and then Napoleon takes power. So when Napoleon takes power, it's not like he's France's savior or anything. He's basically just another tyrannical monarch, and people hate him. So that's where the second French Revolution comes in the 1800s. Yes, of course, darling. All right, so this is going to be the final part, French Revolution. We are going to tie a nice little bow on everything and end the story, and then, take a look at some parallels. So we covered a lot of information together over the past 4 videos. So I just want to kind of go over some main points, some of the things that I think about most when I'm thinking about the French Revolution, and explain anything about the ending that might not have super made sense in my last video because the ending was a little rushed. So the first thing I want to talk about is parallels to the modern times, to today. A lot of you have been commenting about that, and obviously that's why I made the video, because I feel similarly. But I also want to talk about how it can be difficult to directly compare the conditions of France in 1790, 1798 to society in 2024. That's because it's a vastly different lifestyle that we live now to what they were living in, the end of the 1700s. France in this time period was still operating under a feudal economic system, which is left over from the Middle Ages. So I don't really want to get into what that means, but basically when we were talking about the peasants having to pay rent, stuff like that, they're like renting land from, it's like just a different system. But we can definitely still draw parallels between France in this time period, or any country, in any time period, to what we are seeing today in our modern life. So that's why I love history so much. That's why I think history is so cool, because we can analyze information from the past and draw parallels to today and kind of make our own decision based on the blueprint that other people have left for us over the course of thousands and thousands of years. So let's talk about income inequality. A lot of you have probably seen this graph. It's very, very popular on the internet. While this graph is a really good demonstration, it's really hard for me personally to do like a deep dive comparison into wealth distribution in France at this time period to wealth distribution now in the United States, because like I said, the economic systems were vastly different. So going anything beyond that like 40%, 20% round number can be very difficult, especially for me, because I'm not a numbers person. I'm not a statistician or like an account, whatever. I'm not good with numbers. So I'm not an economist, but I will say I can read a graph. And so even though this graph may be a slight oversimplification of the situation, what we can do is we can take what we know about history and then look at recent data from our modern time period and use the history that we know to inform the conclusions that we draw based on the current data. So this is a map of wealth distribution in the United States in 2016. You can look in this map and, knowing what we know about the French Revolution, think about what that might mean. Speaking of the French Revolution, I want to remind everybody that in parts 1 through 4, a lot of people died during the French Revolution, like almost 20,000 people died. And also the French Revolution didn't really take. So this is where I'm going to go into like the rest of the ending, I guess, to the last video. The French Revolution made great strides in doing away with monarchical society and establishing personal freedoms for men during the first part of it, and then kind of not so much in the second half. So remember when I ended the last video and I said now Napoleon's in power 5 years later, he was this military guy. You guys have probably heard of Napoleon, at least in some aspect of your life on this earth. You've like heard his name at least once, I'm guessing. They did not fucking like this guy at all, okay? Many people say that he was a tyrant. Things did not get that much better. And that's why I think this is such a misconception about the French Revolution, which is why I wanted to talk about it, and I thought this when I first learned about it, you kind of think that the French people were going through a hard time, they decided to kill a bunch of people, and then everything was great, all within like a few months or something. This revolution lasted for years, and it barely fucking worked. It succeeded in taking down a monarchy, but another tyrant was put in place, and then they hated him, and so then guess what? They had to do a second revolution, and they put in place another king, King Charles X. So they literally flip-flopped, okay? They've had, several major revolutions, and then obviously they hated having another king because, like, hello. And so then they did another revolution in 1848 when they kicked out the king and made it a republic again. One thing I will say about the French, I love them because they are persistent. If they see something that doesn't look right, they will be doing something about it. It does not matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter how many tries they've already had. They will keep going until they get that shit right. And I really admire that persistence. I was in France in the fall when a lot of their current political stuff was going down, and I swear as soon as the news dropped, they were in the streets. They were doing marches. They were doing protests. Like, I don't even know how they got everyone together that fast. So it's not like a one and done thing. It's not like you just get in and get out. Trying to, make a better life for society or whatever it is takes a long, long time, generations long. So the more we inform ourselves about the history of the past, the more we can make good decisions that benefit, hopefully, like our children or whatever. Anyways, next up is the Great Depression. Really excited to talk about the Great Depression. And maybe the American Revolution too. I think I can get both done pretty quickly. And a lot of you guys were asking for the American Revolution. So that's up next. Thank you guys so much. I so appreciate the love that I've been getting. It's like so sweet. I love talking about history and I'm excited to share more with you. So I'll